You're traveling through another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A journey into a wondrous show whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's the RSS feed up ahead. Your next stop, Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. Anthology is one man's examination of the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer. Each podcast, I review one episode of Rod Serling's iconic series and round out the show with a bonus review of a movie or show related to the week's main topic. I also cover modern anthology science fiction shows such as Black Mirror and Hulu's Dimension 404 in bonus episode review series. You can find more of Anthology, as well as a full episode archive at anthologypod.com. And if you want to contact me, you can use the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, tweet me at obsessiveviewer, or send me an email at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And also, if you want to help support the podcast, the best way to do that would be to go to iTunes and leave a quick review. It helps out the podcast a lot and increases the visibility of the podcast in iTunes' interface and everything. And you can also donate to the podcast through PayPal by clicking the donate button on anthologypod.com. And finally, you can go to the Obsessive Viewer TeePublic store at teepublic.com and type in Obsessive Viewer to get official Anthology merchandise and Obsessive Viewer shirts and stuff like that. The Anthology shirts look really good. So go buy one and help support me. Any and all donations and purchases and everything made goes directly toward keeping the podcast running and is incredibly appreciated. Today I'll be discussing The Howling Man. It's the 5th episode of the Twilight Zone's 2nd season, and it aired on November 4th, 1960. And for this week's bonus review, I'll share my thoughts on Alex Garland's Ex Machina from a couple years ago. But first, I do have a quick email I want to read from a new listener. This new listener said, I'm loading it now. Hi, Matt. I just found your podcast, and I'm enjoying it very much. I've seen every episode of The Twilight Zone at least twice, and with a recap, it all comes back. It's great to hear some background about the actors, directors, and story, as well as your opinions and analysis. I like how you structured the podcast, covering different episodes in a similar format each time. Thank you for doing this. And thank you to that new listener. And I appreciate the email. Of course, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And before I get into the review and everything, I will read a synopsis of this episode, courtesy of Twilight Zone: Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. And of course, this synopsis and the full review is going to be extremely spoiler heavy. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, go check it out and then come back and listen to this episode. One dark and stormy night a few years after the First World War, while traveling through Central Europe, David Ellington finds himself seeking shelter at a European monastery. There, Ellington is introduced to the Brothers of Truth, keepers of the hermitage who are holding a man against his will. Brother Jerome claims their captive is the devil himself, and the constant howling and shrieks are coming from the dark corridors originating from the prisoner, his own form of torture against his captors. Jerome also explains that since the capture, there have been no world wars, pestilence, plague, or unnatural disasters. The prisoner, however, looks nothing like the devil. Alone with Ellington, he tells a mournful tale of his capture and pleads with the visitor to help him get free. Having heard both sides of the story, Ellington chooses to act. Waking in the middle of the night, he steals the keys and grants the captive freedom by removing the staff of truth from the door, and is shocked to witness a transformation before his eyes. Before he could be caught again, Satan, now in his true form, vanishes in a puff of smoke, leaving Ellington a burden to bear, knowing he released the devil back into the world. Many years later, after World War II and the Korean War, a much older Ellington has finally caught up with the Howling Man and warns his servant to ignore the howling and leave the door locked until he returns with the brothers from the monastery. The old woman, also skeptical, waits until her master leaves before opening the door. All right, The Howling Man stars John Carradine as Brother Jerome. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did appear in an episode of Night Gallery in the segment titled Big Surprise. He also appeared in an episode of the 1980s Twilight Zone in the segment called Still Life. He was known for Grapes of Wrath, Stagecoach, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He actually claimed near the end of his life to have appeared in more movies than any other actor. Which is quite a feat. He had more than 300 films to his credit, which is insane. Co-starring as David Ellington is H.M. Wynant. This is his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did appear in Nightmare at Ground Zero, which I covered as a bonus review in episode 14 of the podcast, written by Serling. And he was also in The Comedian, which I reviewed in episode 30 of the podcast. And he was also in 2 episodes of One Step Beyond, and he also appeared in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. So there's a tangential Rod Serling connection there. And then finally, he also appeared in an episode of The Next Step Beyond, which surprised me because I had no idea that that existed. It was an update of One Step Beyond that was in the 1970s. It apparently ran for 25 episodes. So that's kind of interesting. I had no idea that that existed. And rounding out the cast is Robin Hughes as the Howling Man. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did also appear in an episode of Rod Serling's The Loner. And he was also in one episode of One Step Beyond. And a piece of trivia about Robin Hughes is that he served in the Royal Navy during World War II and was actually transferred from the HMS Hood just before it was sunk by the German battleship Bismarck. So that's pretty interesting. Writer for this episode was Charles Beaumont. This was his 5th out of 22 episodes that he wrote for the show. His next one is Static, which will be later this season. And this story in particular was originally published in the November 1959 issue of Rogue. He published that under the pen name of C.B. Lovehill. And it was later reprinted in Beaumont's short story collection, Night Ride and Other Journeys, in 1960. And director for this episode was Douglas Hayes. This was his 6th episode of 9. His next one will actually be next week's Eye of the Beholder, which I'm really excited for. And a little bit of trivia about him in regards to this episode is that as a kid, he was a huge fan of movies like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, and Dracula, and he used those influences in the creation of this episode. So, okay, going into my review of The Howling Man, my thoughts on the episode before, like what I knew about the episode before going in was very little. Given the title, The Howling Man, I kind of assumed that it would have something to do with werewolves or at least a werewolf. But I had that was only based on the title of the episode, and I knew that they had used the visual effects, the same visual effect technique that they used in Long Live Walter Jamison in this episode, and I just assumed that it had something to do with the transformation into a werewolf. And I had also known that this episode had a different tone than other episodes, or at least that's what I had heard through the grapevine. So I was pretty surprised with what we got, and pleasantly surprised at that, because I mean, this storyline was really cool. I really, really, really enjoyed this plot line, and how it unfolded. So the initial thing that, when the episode opens, the first thing I noticed was just the use of Dutch angles. Throughout pretty much most of the episode, the camera is tilted quite a bit throughout it, and I really liked that in this context, because it was very disorienting and very much skewed perspective and everything. It was really good for the overall tone of the episode. And when the episode opened with Ellington just staring directly into the camera, just telling us that he was going to tell us the entire story and everything, against a backdrop of a window with a with rain and thunder and everything in the background. I thought for quite a bit until we got the flashback, I really thought that that he was an actor and that he was performing on stage for us. I thought it was going to go down a route where it was going to be like either an actor on stage or in a scene for a TV show or movie, and then we would get kind of a story where he's in between scenes, kind of like a world of difference. So imagine my surprise when we get a flashback to a monastery and like a castle setting. Which I thought that was a really unique and kind of different setting for the Twilight Zone, and it was the ambiance of it was really impactful and really, really strong. I really liked it. And as Ellington walks through it and the camera tilts and follows him along as people are kind of gathering around him in it, that was a very, very striking image for us to come into this new setting and this story. I really liked it. Kind of felt like, and granted, I will preface this by saying that I'm not too familiar with this type of horror, but it kind of felt like a kind of gothic horror influence in it. Just with the way that the setting was designed and everything, just felt kind of gothic and horror. And in the sound of the Howling Man, I loved that. I thought that was really great. The way that, I mean, it's really unsettling. It's not like howls of pain per se, but it's more like one of desperation and sorrow. And it's just like, it really gets under your skin, and it really helps bring us into David's dilemma in this episode, and how we are just as lost as he is, or how we need to determine which side is right and which side is wrong, along with him. And so throughout the episode, we get a back and forth between David and the Howling Man, and then David and Brother Jerome. And it's clear like each side is trying to win him over. Brother Jerome is explaining to him that the Howling Man is the devil and that they've captured him there, and they can't let him go because he is the devil and he will bring about war and devastation and everything. Whereas the Howling Man is trying to get David to believe that the monks and the Brotherhood are just crazy and they've got the wrong guy and that they're insane. And I absolutely loved this dynamic so much. Like, honestly, probably my only real complaint or issue with the episode is that I kind of wish that this was a feature-length movie, because this is such an interesting concept and an interesting morality tale, and the manipulation that's played out between the devil or the Howling Man / the devil and David is just really, really top notch. And the fact that all of this unfolds in a standard 24 minute, episode of the Twilight Zone is really, really spectacular and, impressive. And it's not as black and white as you would think. Like the Howling Man makes a very, compelling point. And his point that, okay, well, the Brotherhood are clearly insane, or he doesn't even say, that's the thing. He says that they're not insane or evil. He says that they're just mad. They're just crazy. And that is just such a nice, subtle manipulation of David, because he's tapping into, David's humanity and trying to make it sound like he doesn't blame them or anything, or he doesn't harbor any ill will toward them. He just thinks that they're crazy. And that's such a nice manipulation toward David. But it's not like the Brotherhood are upfront with him from the start, because Brother Jerome tries to make him believe, or it tells him at first, that there's no man there. And while he's not technically lying, because in his his phrasing, he's saying that there's no man here because it's the devil, but he kind of makes it sound like David is just crazy and hearing things at first, which can further be used as ammunition for the Howling Man side of the side of things, because they Brother Jerome in the Brotherhood made David think that he was just delusional or hearing things, and it's really, I don't know how else to put it, but it was really interesting the way that this triangle worked out. I really loved the confusion of it because Brother Jerome tries to explain to him that he's not hearing anything. He didn't speak to anyone. There was no man there. And I love that it was so confusing and how just up in the air it was, because I've said this before many times on the show, but I really love those types of episodes where a character's sanity is in question, or what their perspective of something is wildly different from what other people perceive. I just really love that dynamic, and this episode flirts with that a little bit without going that same route. And it's really effective because it really brings out the flaws in Brother Jerome's side, and helps lead David down to a very tragic mistake. And so when Brother Jerome explains to him that, okay, yes, there is a man there, he is not a man, he's the devil, and he explains the backstory of it and how they've had him there for 5 years, and in that he's being kept under guard by the Brotherhood, and the staff of truth is keeping him there. That was really good background, and that was really good, a really good way to propel the plot forward and give David his central moral dilemma. Because the question is Brother Jerome crazy, or is the Howling Man manipulating him? And just really the whole concept of the entire episode, where there are different sides trying to manipulate someone into believing something. It's kind of a play on good versus evil. It kind of reminded me vaguely of one of my favorite TV shows, really of all time, Lost. They played with a lot of these similar themes and elements, especially in the later parts of the series. And it made me wonder if maybe Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse and the writers were inspired by the Twilight Zone. I would not be surprised if they were. And speaking, or going back to talking about the Staff of Truth, I really like that as just as a prop, and as a, I guess MacGuffin wouldn't be quite accurate, but as just a prop and a reason to explain how he's being held captive. It gives the episode kind of a fantasy feel, and a fantasy feel, and it doesn't hurt that John Carradine kind of has a Gandalfish presence. But I just really like that because it kind of gives it's not necessarily explained why that's able to contain him, except that it's hinted at there's some mystical properties to it, or what have you. I read that originally, and I'll get into this in trivia, but it was originally going to be a cross, but they changed it to the Staff of Truth. I like that because it, like I said, it gives it kind of a fantasy element to it, while also kind of making it, giving it a little bit more mythology to it, because it's not like it makes it feel like there are forces at work that are above David for just a brief moment, essentially. And the whole idea that the devil being contained is what's keeping the world from having another world war, or all of these unnatural disasters and everything. I think that is just a really fascinating thing. Like that's a really fascinating premise, and knowing that that's part of the plot, and then later on after David releases him, knowing that he must carry the burden of essentially being the one to cause World War II and the Korean War. Like that's, I mean, my God, that burden is ridiculous. That's why I kind of wish that this was a feature length movie, because I would love to see how a character could deal with that burden more heavily and with a longer runtime. But given the 24 minutes that this episode had, it was really effective that way anyway, and it was very thought provoking in that manner. And I think throughout most of it, I just kind of assumed that he was the devil. Well, that's not true. That's not true. It was definitely up in the air for most of the episode. But once David goes to the cell and he asks why he doesn't just lift up the staff of truth, like that moment, that was such a great moment, because that's him almost realizing, like, yeah, there's something there. There's definitely something there. But it's not enough to keep him from unleashing the Howling Man. And I love that leading up to that, all things considered, the Howling Man just barely speaks to David throughout the entire episode, but he gets enough into his head, or he gets deeper into his head, the more that he does talk to him. And I think that at that point, when I was still trying to figure out whether or not he was the devil, that was pretty hard evidence that he was the devil and manipulating him and everything. And that's, I just love the way that dialogue is written, because it feels so earnest that he is being held captive, and he is, like, it's very possible that, the Brotherhood are insane and that they're keeping him held captive against his will, and that he's an innocent person. That's definitely possible and plausible in this plot line, but it's just, there's just enough doubt on both sides where it's a convincing moral conundrum for David. Like there's just enough there for him to really have doubts on either side. And I think that's, honestly, that's brilliant storytelling, in my opinion. That is absolutely brilliant storytelling, in my opinion, because they could have made this so lopsided or one-sided, and they could have made it so cheesy and not authentic, or they could have made it more suspenseful by making it less realistic. But there's just enough here. There's just enough here for it to be really thought-provoking, and it all comes down to the moment where David asks the Howling Man if the Staff of Truth is the only reason that he's being held captive, and he's like, yeah, and then he's just like, why don't you just lift it up? Because it's like he can see that, like, he's shown that he can reach out, like it's not like he's confined too much. Like he reached out and grabbed him earlier in the episode. But I love the kind of rapid reaction of the Howling Man saying, like, oh, there's no time, just do it. And it's just this, the moral center of this is that, like, human compassion, like mankind's compassion is what let the devil loose and caused untold destruction and terror upon the world. And I love that scene. That's kind of the summation of that moral center of the episode, is that it was Brother Jerome says to David, or David says that he didn't recognize him. He didn't recognize that he was the devil, and that Brother Jerome says that that's man's weakness and Satan's strength. And that's just a very profound thing, because, like, a profound thing to put in this episode, and very thought-provoking, in that evil can be anywhere. Like, pure evil can be anywhere. We see on the news all the time, like, these, like, horrible human beings that can only be really categorized as evil, doing despicable things. And it's kind of the classic thing where it's like, oh, he was such a nice neighbor, and he was so he was so nice and friendly and everything, and no one knows what's simmering underneath him. And this is kind of that same thing played out in this really big platform here. So then the kind of denouement of the episode after, which, by the way, hang on, let me stop and talk about the actual transformation. I loved it. Like, it was really cool because, like, the lighting effect that was used in Long Live Walter Jameson, it's not as pronounced in this episode, or it's not as, like, it's just used just slightly to kind of accentuate some features when he's stroking his beard, but it's used to great effect. And then we get this rolling dolly shot of the devil walking down the corridor, and underneath or behind each pillar as he passes through it's another stage of his transformation, which apparently that was achieved by just having him in different stages walk across, and then they paste together different parts here and there. It was effective. It was great. The look on Robin Hughes's face throughout it's a nice turn. Like in terms of performances and everything, I think Robin Hughes did a really great job, because he really sold the despair of the Howling Man, and then just in just very brief glimpses after he's released, we get the sense, like, yeah, he is pure evil. He is the devil incarnate. And then even without, like, the makeup effects and the horns and the features and everything as he's walking through it, like, just the look on his face and the expression that or the emotion that he's expressing in his eyes and his grin is just chilling enough by itself. And I think that's really commendable for him, because he did so much with so little screen time, essentially, in that very small moment. So then after all that, we get the denouement of David explaining to the assistant or maid or housekeeper, I'm not sure who it was, but he's explaining to her, saying, like, this is my story. This is why we cannot let him out of here. I need to go get the Brotherhood, and I'll be back in a few minutes. Which, I mean, this is probably one small fault of it, because we don't know the context of this. We don't know what his situation is with this woman. We don't know if she's just a hotel maid, and that he's going to go fire off a letter or make a phone call. But I love that's kind of my inclination, is that he's going to make a phone call. Because he says that he'll be back in a few minutes. And I love that, because it's not like he is telling her to stay there for a month while he goes to Europe and grabs Brother Jerome. He's just saying a few minutes so that he can presumably make a call or whatever. And even in those few minutes, like, the moment after that, like, she's almost immediately, like, there's curiosity there. It's not like she's being manipulated by the devil to open the door or anything. She has that genuine curiosity, and you could maybe read it as her being, her just flat out not believing David and just wanting to be compassionate and let this person that's being imprisoned in this room free. Either way you read that's really powerful on the devil's perspective, that she almost immediately lets him out. And in this moment, I kind of thought it would be kind of cool if at the end of the episode, and I like the end of the episode. It's a strong moment, but I think that it would have been kind of cool if, when she opened the door, it just turned out to be a completely different man, in that it just shows that David had gone mad and had imprisoned someone who wasn't worthy of being imprisoned or anything. That would be more shock value than anything. The way that the episode ended definitely held together well and put a nice bow on the morality tale of this episode. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was really fantastic. Okay, so I have a few pieces of trivia for this episode. This was the first episode of the second season to air that was not written by Rod Serling. And Charles Beaumont had originally envisioned that the monks would keep the devil imprisoned by putting a cross on the front of his door. But the producers were afraid of backlash from religious groups, and they decided to substitute it with the staff of truth over. But Beaumont had objected to that. But I think that worked well. I don't know, like. A cross is universally recognized. Obviously, it's a universally recognized symbol. The staff of truth, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of it. I don't know if it is a religious thing. I don't know if there's anything there. But from my own personal perspective, without Googling it or anything, I just think staff of truth has some kind of mystical properties that kind of bring some. That brings about some dimensionality to it, or to the episode. It gives it more interest. Yeah, and I don't think that it had any bearing in anything real, the staff of truth, that is, because when I Googled it, it just brought up South Park's The Stick of Truth. And another piece of trivia is that Douglas Hayes was also influenced by a similar transformation scene in 1935's Werewolf of London for the transformation scene. So overall, I think that this was just a really strong episode with a really great morality play at the center of it. And it's something that I really enjoyed. And I've said this before, and it's not anything new or anything that anyone... Like, it's not anything new, but the Twilight Zone really excels when it's just two or three people with conflicting viewpoints and ideologies battling it out, and that's something that was really strong in this episode, and it's something that I really appreciated about it. And again, it just has a really strong moral theme to it. That evil is everywhere, and the devil can be hiding in plain sight, and that human compassion can be its downfall as well, which is a pretty bleak outlook and everything. Very bleak, in fact, but then again, this is also a Charles Beaumont episode, so he is kind of renowned, from what I've seen, as having darker episodes. So the Howling Man is definitely up there for me as being one of my favorites of season 2 so far. I would love to see this type of story play out in a feature length setting. And if you haven't watched it yet, I would recommend checking out Lost, because it plays with a lot of these same themes and everything. And definitely it's one of the best shows I've ever seen. Okay, so before we move on to this week's bonus review, here's a highlight from episode 192 of The Obsessive Viewer, a weekly movie and TV podcast that I host with my friend Tiny, along with the occasional guest co-host, over at obsessiveviewer.com.
I get that, because in the comic books, the Ancient One is an old Tibetan. I'll say. Tibetan.
I'm willing to bet you're right.
God damn it. That was good. I believe is old Tibetan person, which I believe actually was one of the reasons they changed it, because apparently China is such a huge market with these movies right now.
Oh, they
didn't want to make him a Tibetan.
That makes sense. Mom. Of course, you can find The Obsessive Viewer on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and at obsessiveviewer.com. And you can find the episode you just heard a clip from at obsessiveviewer.com/OV192. And also, I did start a new podcast under obsessiveviewer.com called Tower Junkies, where me and Tiny are going to be talking about Stephen King and his magnum opus, The Dark Tower. You can find more information about that at towerjunkiespod.com. All right, so my bonus review this week is for Alex Garland's Ex Machina. Now, Ex Machina came out a couple years ago. It had a wide release in 2015, but it had a festival run in 2014. Written and directed by Alex Garland, this movie was his directorial debut, and Alex Garland is previously known for writing collaborating with Danny Boyle by writing 28 Days Later and Sunshine. Two of my favorite movies, honestly. Even though they're more homage to movies in their respective subgenres, but they're still spectacular movies in my opinion. This bonus review actually was recommended by longtime listener Greg, and definitely appreciate it, because any excuse I have to watch Ex Machina again, I will take happily, because it's a fantastic movie. And of course, with this episode, or with this bonus review, I will not spoil it. So I'll give my kind of broad opinion of the movie, and then if you haven't seen it, go check it out. So the plot summary, according to IMDb, for Ex Machina is: a young programmer is selected to participate in a groundbreaking experiment in synthetic intelligence by evaluating the human qualities of a breathtaking humanoid AI. So, much like the Howling Man, Ex Machina is kind of a morality tale with three characters at the center of it, with one of those three characters kind of trying to determine who to believe or who to trust in this. So you have Nathan, played by Oscar Isaac, who he's phenomenal in this movie. He's fantastic. He plays the owner and genius behind what's essentially Google. It's in the movie. It's called Blue Book. It's the biggest search engine and everything. And he's like he's a tech genius. And then you have Caleb, who is played by Domhnail Gleeson, who is this programmer that works for the company that wins the opportunity to work with Nathan to determine if he achieved true AI, with Ava, which is the third character in the movie, played by Alicia Vikander. So the movie is set up into different sessions with Ava, and as the sessions progress, you get more you get more of a sense of what's going on and who to trust and everything as they go through each session. And kind of the shining thing for me in this movie is that there are moments in between each session where Caleb and Nathan are talking about what they're doing and talking about essentially kind of these broad or these large scale opinions about the possibility of what they're actually attaining. They're talking in kind of big things about how, there's a scene where they're talking about how, if he did achieve true AI, then it's just basically the next step of evolution. And then there's a great moment where Nathan tells Caleb that, the AIs are going to look back on humanity the way that we look back on fossils and cavemen and stuff like that. It's the dialogue between Nathan and Caleb throughout the movie is so profound and intellectual and interesting that I ate it up so much. Like, I loved it. And the film is beautiful. Like, it takes some clear influence or clear influence from Kubrick. There's definitely some kind of 2001 type of imagery, at least in the set design and the way that the house that they're in is created and configured. But I think kind of like all three performers are really impressive. I want to kind of single out Oscar Isaac though, because he is this really fascinating character in this movie. Nathan is very fascinating because he's this, like the first scene with Caleb meeting Nathan, Nathan's working out and saying that he's really hungover, and then Caleb asks him if it was a fun party, and then he just kind of looks at him like there was no party. And it's kind of it's kind of a funny, like, awkward moment, but it's interesting because Nathan is, I get the sense that Nathan is kind of, he's burdened by what he's created. He sees the evolution of technology into artificial intelligence as being something that's inevitable. And he is essentially, from his viewpoint, he's creating something he's creating, he is godlike in that he is creating something that could replace humanity, and he's kind of burdened with that. So he has that kind of layer to the character, and Oscar Isaac plays that kind of troubled genius thing really spectacularly. And the script is wonderful with it as well. Alicia Vikander is phenomenal. She's very sympathetic, and it's really fascinating to see her speak to Caleb and interact with him. And you really get the sense that she's learning as she goes, and she's learning how to be human, essentially. And the visual effects are astounding. I think it actually won an Oscar for the visual effects. If it didn't win, it was definitely nominated. And that's great, because special effects, you don't need to have big explosions and like, it doesn't need to be just visual effects craziness and everything. Yes, it did win Best Visual Effects at the 2016 Academy Awards. But what's great is that you don't need these big explosion and big action set pieces to be great, to have great visual effects. Visual effects are all about, adding to the scene and creating something that's visually stunning. And when you see Ava, where she's essentially a face on a robotic body with like flesh hands, it's really jaw-dropping, and the way that the movements are created and the way that she moves around and the effects of that are just really, really top notch. And just the general aesthetic of the entire episode of the entire movie is just really, it's really beautiful, because it's kind of like, honestly, Ex Machina is kind of like it's kind of like a feature-length Black Mirror episode. The technology is like, it exists sort of in the present day, but the technology is really a little bit more advanced. It's like tomorrow's technology, essentially. And the kind of compound or house that they're in has some cool technology with it and everything, but it's understated in that it's not in your face as really advanced technology and futuristic. It's just kind of lived in current day. Yeah. And then the way the movie culminates toward the end, it's really fantastic. It's such a great movie. I really loved it. And I was so happy to see Alex Garland do something so successfully, because his collaborations with Danny Boyle. So to the 28 Days Later, that's such a fun reimagining of the zombie film, and it pays homage to a lot of George A. Romero's work, and while still doing something different. And it's really fantastic. And also the score in that movie is out of this world. And then the next movie they did, Sunshine, is kind of the same thing. It's a space movie that pays a lot of homage to Alien and other like space movies, but it has this really strong morality at the center of it about like God versus science and religion versus science and faith versus science. And it has such a great ensemble cast and everything, and it's a really fantastic movie. So coming from being such huge fans of those movies, to see this very, very thought-provoking and successful science fiction movie from Alex Garland, where he wrote and directed it, is just it was such a treat. It was such a treat, and I'm super excited to see what he does next, because I really admire his work. And let me see what he is doing next, because I know that he had something in the pipeline. Okay, and his next movie is called Annihilation. It's supposed to come out sometime next year, maybe in February. The plot description is: a biologist signs up for a dangerous secret expedition where the laws of nature don't apply. So I'll see that opening weekend because I am such a fan of Alex Garland and the work that he does. Yeah. Oh, and that's apparently based on the first book in what's called the Southern Reach trilogy. So, Oh, and Oscar Isaac is going to be in it as well. Anyway, so that's about enough, or that's about all that I've got for this week's episode of Anthology. Thank you guys for listening, and if you want to help support the podcast, please leave a rating and review on iTunes. Helps us out a lot, and then also get a shirt, because again, I just like the logo design for Anthology. I'm really happy with it. I got it from podcastdesigner.com, and he did such a great job, and it looks really amazing on a shirt. So go check that out at the TeePublic store for Obsessive Viewer. Just go and type in obsessiveviewer.com or Anthology Podcast, and you'll find it. And then next week for the next episode of Anthology, I'll be reviewing Eye of the Beholder, which is episode 6 of season 2. It's kind of an iconic episode of the Twilight Zone. I'm really looking forward to digging into it and sharing my thoughts on it. The bonus review for that will be an episode of Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse called The Man in the Funny Suit, which is a dramatization of the behind the scenes of what happened during the making of Requiem for a Heavyweight. So I'm really excited to check that out. That is available in its entirety on YouTube. I will put a link in the show notes and everything. And of course, we are coming to the end of my bonus episode review series of Dimension 404. So go check that out as well if you haven't already. And we don't have a release date for season 4 of Black Mirror, but that should be coming out before the end of this year. So we should be getting those pretty soon, I would think. So that'll do it for this episode. And thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Tickets are on sale now for the 4th annual Shocktober in Irvington, presented by the Obsessive Viewer podcast. Join the hosts of the Obsessive Viewer on October 6th, 2017 at the Irving Theater for a one-night event screening of short horror films, including the premiere screenings of the latest film in J.P. Leck's cross-medium Elsewhere World universe, the latest film from Snapshot Productions, and much more. Come celebrate the horror genre in the historic Irvington area and meet the filmmakers with live Q&As after each screening. You can also win DVDs and Blu-rays, movie-related party games, horror-themed Funko Pop figures, gift cards to Irvington businesses, and so much more. Tickets are on sale now at ShocktoberInIrvington.com. All proceeds go directly to the Irvington Historical Society. And whether at the Irving Theater or in your nightmares, we will be seeing you on the 6th of October.
Thank you for listening to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For more of Anthology and a full archive of my episodes, go to AnthologyPod.com. And if you want to help support the show, the easiest way you can do that is by leaving a rating and a review on iTunes. You can also make donations to the show courtesy of the donate link in the show notes of each episode and on AnthologyPod.com. For recurring donations, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and just choose one of the Anthology reward tiers. If you enjoy Anthology, feel free to check out The Obsessive Viewer, a weekly movie and TV podcast I host with my friend Tiny and occasional guest co-hosts over at ObsessiveViewer.com. You can also join the Obsessive Viewer Facebook group at facebook.com/TheObsessiveViewer. For book reviews and commentary on the world of reading, check out our sister site at obsessivebooknerd.com. And for philosophical discussions from a secular viewpoint, check out my friends Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. Finally, if you'd like to contact me with your thoughts on the show, my reviews, my bonus reviews, or for any other reason, you can tweet me at ObsessiveViewer, send me an email at matt@obsessiveviewer.com, or send me a message on Facebook and like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.